Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Unown Draft League Podcast, brought to you by Smeargle and Limevolt. I am Limevolt, and I'm joined by Smeargle. How you doing, man?
Hello. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing quite nice. Now, I gotta say, we got some really good games ahead of us. Obviously, last week was quite nice. It was very solid, but a lot of people were sort of feeling things out. It was their first week playing with their team, so there was a bit of uncertainty going on. This week, I feel like people were a lot better at honing in on their game plans and understanding what their goal was going into each match.
Absolutely. These games looked pretty fun, and do you want to just hop right in?
I see no reason not to. So, why don't we do that with the first match that got played, if I'm not mistaken, 24 hours of the pairings being posted. These players just snapped right into it. These being the Bellabog Basculins, coached by Olive, and the Hyrule Herdiers, coached by Lake. The Bellabog Basculins having a roster brought to this game consisting of Murkrow, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Iron Treads, Gengar, Rotom Heat, and Pichu. Not Pikachu, not Raichu, Pichu.
With the Hyrule Herdiers bringing Fletchinder, Regieleki, Regidrago, Mimikyu, Quillfish, and Passimian. Now, last week I really hyped up this team.
And I really shat on Regidrago.
And I think this week it went in Lime's favor.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Starting off with game one, we saw that Link decided to try and go a bit more defensive, having screens Aleki as opposed to an offensive set. It was definitely a solid idea, considering just how fast and offensive Olive is. However, her team being so fast and offensive kind of just allowed it to blow through the screens, as Gengar just ran amok. That thing was crazy this game. It just kept doing so much damage, and just nothing was able to stand up to it.
So much so that she did not bring Urshifu at all.
Yeah, Gengar proved to be very effective, not just in game one, but in game two as well. Her S tier, it's not that she didn't bring it in the back or anything. From what we know, it just wasn't present at all. It wasn't there in either game. Now, I will say that in game one, at least, Link failed to deal with the Gengar at all, partially because of, well, it just being solid and strong, but also there were a lot of points where they could have dealt with it, but it was just left alone for one reason or another. And it getting that time just let its damage keep piling on until Link's roster just sort of crumpled under the weight.
I do want to say the Terra Fairy was pretty cool to see on it as well. Dazzling Gleam
Yes.
is not the most common move on a Gengar.
Yes, Terra Fairy Gengar was something we saw in Game 2, and it did really, really good. But another thing I want to mention that was in Game 2 wasn't just the Gengar, but a really solid support that was able to work alongside it. That being Pichu. Pichu was super solid this game. I mean, reminding yourself what tier it's in, this thing, for all intents and purposes, should be a throwaway pick, something that you should rarely actually bring to one of your matches. But I mean, if it's going to be a rare bring, then this is one of those instances. And it did really good. Its ability to spread para with Nuzzle and just generally flinch with Fake Out, while not the most unique role, is certainly a solid one, and one that it excelled in.
Absolutely. It looks like team matchup wise that Olive just countered Link like almost every step of the way.
I don't know if countered is the right word I'd use. I'm willing to agree that it was definitely a good matchup, but I think it's more so just that Link's team wants to try and be fast and offensive, but it's not fully committed to it. You'd consider it more so like 80% of the way there. Olive's team, the Bellawog Basculins, are just complete all or nothing offense, and it is terrifying when it gets everything going.
I was looking at it with Regieleki. She brought the Pichu. For the Regidrago, there's Iron Treads, the Terra Fairy on the
Gengar.
Gengar,
Mm-hmm.
and then Rotom Heat in the background can probably do a lot to it anyway. Like Mimikyu is the only thing that doesn't seem hard countered, and again, there's the Iron Treads. That everything that Link has, Olive just has a matchup right into it.
It's very true. Link's whole idea, their whole strategy of, like I had mentioned in the roster reviews, the putting all your eggs in one basket, right? Having like one or two Pokemon that are super linear, but in that one linear moment are super strong in what they do. We saw that really work against Link, as their Pokemon really didn't have the flexibility needed to try and overcome all of his roster. It was pure simplicity, and while simplicity can be really strong, if it isn't working out, then that often means it won't have the versatility it needs to try and overcome that. So overall, with the first set, it went heavily in the favor of Olive with a 2-0 victory. And really, what else can be said? It was just a complete blitz.
It was, how many turns do you think across both games? I think it went to
I'd have to look at it again, but I'm
I
not
think it was
confident it's double digits.
across both games, I think total 15.
Maybe. I'm unsure. I'm not going to make that call here without knowing, but needless to say, it was a very fast-paced match. Moving on to the next, though. We have another match that happened very quickly compared to when the announcements were posted, this being the Forsaken City Frogadiers, coached by Hazel, versus the Hardened Metapods, coached by Sour. Smeargle, would you like to go ahead and tell us about the teams here?
All right, we've got the Forsaken City Frogadiers with the Greninja, Klefki, Noivern, Muck Alolan, Zoro Hisuian, and Chi-Yu.
On the other side of the ring, we have Sour, who brought Dondozo, Tatsugiri, Mistrovis, Flamigo, Urshifu, and Sneasel.
These games were also really fun to watch. I know
They were hilarious.
You had a lot to say about these ones.
I mean, what can be said? Game 1, we see what may as well be Hazel's signature Pokemon at this point, being Zorua, just be hilarious. I mean, it's lead, it's disguised as Chi-Yu. Sour's Mischievous protects, thinking, there's a Chi-Yu on the field. I don't want to get blown up for whatever reason, right? Nope, it's just a Zorua. And of course, that play, forcing the passiveness from Sour, allowed it to just do silly things, as Tatsugiri got blown up immediately in that turn 1.
It was pretty fun. The Noivern having Frisk as well was very interesting.
Yes, the Noivern having Frisk, there wasn't any super vital information that came up in Game 1 that was gleaned from Frisk. However, one thing I do want to mention, dipping our toes briefly into Game 2, Frisk revealed the Sneasel's item, which was bright powder. Come on!
It just I
understand. If there's nothing else that really matters, I guess I get it. It's better than no item. But there's usually something that's better than it. Come on. But going back to Game 1, Terras on both sides worked out pretty well. Terra Fairy on Dozo to stop Noivern. Alolan Muck was able to stop it because of that, however. It seemed that Muck was actually designed almost entirely to be a Dondozo counter, which is, think about that for a moment. You're playing regular VGC. The last thing you think when you see a Dondozo is just like, yes, I have my Muck. It will answer this. But that's the beauty of the Draft League. It had that Poison Stab to deal with the Terra Fairy Dondozo. It had Terra Electric Thunder Punch to deal with Dondozo if it doesn't Terra. Like, this thing, it actually was a pretty interesting call to try and deal with it.
Not to mention its natural bulk.
Yeah, Alolan Muck is certainly no slouch.
It was very hard to take down.
Yeah, it's definitely not rivaling Dondozo itself in terms of bulk, but it was solid. Now, one last thing I want to mention about Game 1 is that Flamigo had Co-Star activate. You hear that, normally you're thinking, oh, sweet, it got a big boost. What, did he get a Swords Dance up on something else? Did they get a speed boost? No. Mischievous got hit.
Drop.
Yeah, Mischievous got hit with a Bitter Malice from the Zorua, which lowered its attack, and when Flamigo came in, that was its partner. So it also got the attack drop in that place, which... unfortunate.
Really unfortunate. Yep.
Moving on to Game 2 for a moment. I'll try and keep this brief since looking back at it, wow, my notes are long for this one. We already mentioned the Bright Powder Sneasel, which was silly. We did see some really, really risky plays. Notably, Sour at one point in time hard switched into Dozogiri, as in pivoted both Pokemon into Tatsugiri and Dondozo. Obviously very aggressive. However, one thing to note is that the Urshifu was on the field when this happened, and the Tatsugiri was put into the Urshifu slot. So if Hazel was super scared of that Pokemon and tried to double into it, well, that would have just been a free turn. So while it didn't end up mattering too much, while the turn didn't really work out that well, it was definitely a smart play on Sour's end, and one that I think absolutely should be commended, as just seeing that threat assessment, not just for your opponent, but analyzing the threat level of your own team and trying to play around that is something you don't see that often, barring people just going for protect mind games.
At the same time, the Greninja revealed that it had something interesting for the Dondozo as well, as it did reveal Haze.
Yeah, I mean, we say it's interesting. It's definitely a smart call, but you see your opponent, you see that they have Dondozo and Tatsugiri. You're going to try and bring at least one Hazemon if you can. Greninja is certainly not the Pokemon I would have immediately thought to be carrying it, but it was definitely a smart play overall and just shows that Hazel had some solid prep going into this week. Lots of answers to the Dozo. You know, you have the haze from the Greninja, you have the muck of all things to stop it. Like, it was good play overall. Going into game 3, as this game, the set was a bit back and forth. So we did have a game 3. Sour tried to do it. They tried to do the silly. They tried to go for the Parish song Tatsugiri strat, right? Have the Tatsugiri listen to the Parish song, have its counter tick away a little, and then switch into Dondozo. That way it dies in its mouth. You can send in, Flamigo to copy the stat boost, and then just steamroll from there. It was really close, but it just didn't work. Sour was one turn away from Giri dying and Co-Star activating it, but Haze Greninja just immediately ruined it. And after that, a freeze from the Greninja just made it even more insulting. So definitely a bold play, definitely something that we would have popped off completely if it actually got pulled off, but it just didn't end up working out.
Even if it did go off, when we think about it, the Greninja, it could have just hazed both of the boosts as well.
In theory, yeah, but if the
faster,
not necessarily, because Flamigo would have been able to come in and copy the boost. That includes a ×2 speed boost, so it would have been able to, in theory at least, just outspeed and knock out the Greninja before it's able to haze. If anything, maybe that's something we should have seen. We should have seen targeting into the Greninja from the Flamigo or the Urshifu. Maybe have like a scarf on either of them just to try and anticipate, the haze. But like I said, Greninja wasn't even the Pokemon I initially thought would be carrying haze. So that's very hindsight advice or idea,
Yeah.
Overall, both players played well. There was solid prep on both sides, but in the end, Hazel ended up taking it.
And these first 2 weeks were players that in week 1 thought would win but lost, and then week 2 just bounced right back.
Exactly. It's very clear that you're not always going to just have your record be set in stone, right? Like losing early doesn't guarantee you're going to win. Winning early doesn't guarantee you're going to lose. There's a lot of back and forth, as every team you fight is unique. Whether it's considered better or worse, whether it's considered a good matchup or not, every week is its own week. And just because you lose 1 or 2 does not mean that you're out of it by any means.
Nope, that's what's so fun about Swiss.
Yeah, it definitely helps make sure that people don't just end up steamrolling. If one person just happens to get lucky and they match into a bunch of people in a row that may not have the best of drafts, or maybe they're a little more inexperienced, well, that can just cause them to run away with it. Swiss making it so that the matches are a lot more even sort of keeps players in the same ballpark.
Yep. And do you want to get into week 3?
Sure. Yeah, I'm down to get into week 3. I mean, who wouldn't? But let's not get into week 3. Let's get into match 3 first. Of week 2, that is.
That's true.
Yes, and that, of course, would be the Frostpunk Frostmoths versus the Giddy Goomy.
I just nope, ignore it. Anyway, the The Frostpunk Frostmoths versus Giddy Goomy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the coaches here being Trico and Fro, respectively.
This this match was very fun as well.
Yes, very fun. Definitely some cool stuff. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about the Pokemon that participated here?
We have the Frostpunk Frostmoths, coached by Reckless Trico himself, with Hisuian Arcanine, Tornadus, Hisuian Electrode, Persian, Azelf, and Goodra.
And this, of course, is pitted up against the Giddy Goomies, coached by Fro, as I mentioned, who have Thundurus incarnate form. Worth noting, the Reckless Trico had Tornadus incarnate. Then you have the Rotom Heat, Scovillain, Flamigo again, Mimikyu, and Oricorio Senju, that being the fire type one. Now, game one. There's something I immediately want to call out. Scovillain, right? It's not that strong of a Pokemon. At least it's generally not considered to be that strong of a Pokemon. It's also not considered to be that bulky of a Pokemon, right? Like, it's considered just okay. Maybe a little above average, but its typing isn't the best, so people wouldn't consider it like a defensive Pokemon, right?
Nope.
This thing lived a Helping Hand boosted Flare Blitz from Hisuian Arcanine. What? That's insane! Like, I saw the Helping Hand, I was like, oh, okay, whatever this thing attacks is going to die, right? But then the Scovillain was just able to eat it right up. Well, I'm not going to say it didn't take little damage, it nearly died from it, but the fact that it hung on at all is impressive to say the very least. And speaking of this Scovillain, there was a really, really interesting idea going on here. Now, as I mentioned, Flamigo is on this team as well, and the Scovillain, as opposed to running an ability like Chlorophyll, it attempted to run Moody. And the Flamigo, who has Co-Star, attempted to take advantage of that Moody, copying the stat boosts. It would copy the stat reductions as well. However, it ran a White Herb. Now, it's possible that was just for, intimidate Hisuian Arcanine or whatever, but I think it's infinitely funnier and infinitely more interesting to imagine that this was specifically designed to take advantage of Moody. Which, if that's the case, props to you. That is creative beyond recognition.
Bro has been building in both weeks 1 and 2 around the synergizing the abilities, and it's been so really cool much fun to watch.
Yeah, week 1 seeing Dancer just take the spotlight. Week 2 seeing things like Moody and Co-Star work together. I mean, Fro, there's a reason that their Showdown username is From and Noodles. There's a reason they drafted a Sun team. This dude's cooking. This dude in the kitchen. Now, switching over to Trico's side for a moment.
Out with a Rotom Heat.
True, it does have the Rotom Heat. He's got the oven. Going over to Trico's side for a moment there. Persian was a really interesting inclusion on this team. Now, it did have the Helping Hand that previously boosted the Harkonine, as we mentioned, but it only had one other move besides that. Last Resort. Normally, when you think of Last Resort plus one other move, you would expect, Fake Out, right? But no, Helping Hand. Give it an option beyond turn 1. It was definitely cool to see. As well, obviously, Fro has the Thundurus as their S-tier Pokemon. The Persian had Limber, which was really cool to see, making it so that it couldn't get paralyzed by the Thundurus, and it could just keep firing off Last Resorts over and over and over again without being able to be impeded.
With Last Resorts not being affected by Technician, it would have otherwise had a useless ability.
I wouldn't say it useless. Unnerve is the other one, and Unnerve is definitely a solid ability, especially in doubles. But yeah, seeing the Limber is definitely cool. Moving on to Game 2, we saw something really funny, I will be entirely honest. The Goodra, right? Definitely a scary Pokemon. Oricorio doesn't really have a way to hit that, right?
Nope.
But what it does have is Revelation Dance. Yep. And the way Revelation Dance is coded so that it works across all the forms is that whatever your primary typing is, whatever the Oricorio's primary typing is, Revelation Dance is just going to be that type. It's basically Terra Blast, right?
Yep.
So when the Oricorio terrored into ice, it was able to hit the Goodra super effectively, which was just so funny. Like, it's not the strongest option ever. It's not like it's, 200 base power, ignores protect, whatever. But it was definitely something very funny to see. Just being reminded of that property of the move, which is often neglected and ignored, since Oricorio is a Pokemon that's often neglected and ignored. Anything you wanted to add on to that?
I don't think so until we get to game 3.
Sure. Well, I mean, I have plenty to say about Game 3, but I've definitely been in the hot seat for a while now, so I'll go ahead and trade it off to you.
This Mimikyu right here.
Yes!
Last week we saw it use Mimic, was it?
Yes, last week it was Mimic.
To learn Revelation Dance.
Mm-hmm.
This week he goes for Copycat.
Yep, first Mimic, now Copycat. This Mimikyu, it's sick of being hidden under its shroud. It's sick of looking like another Pokemon. This thing just wants to break out of its shell and dance.
And with him dancing, so too does the Oricorio. We saw in one turn 3 Revelation Dance from 2 Pokemon.
Yep. Another fun thing we saw in Game 3 was the Goodra, more specifically its item. Now, Mirror Herb, it's definitely not the most common thing ever, but it's definitely a solid item, right? And especially if this thing was used to try and copy like a Quiver Dance from Oricorio or Lilligant, then that's a great play. But we found that'd be great, but that's not what happened. We found out about Mirror Herb Goodra because it copied a Swords Dance boost that Scovillain got from Moody, which that's one way to find out about the item.
Swords Dance Dracometer, what can I say?
True, yeah, run the Power Whip for coverage. That's the thing, right, guys? We're playing random battles, right, guys?
Yeah, if you're playing against Fro, run something with a Mirror Herb, you're getting a boost.
You're honestly probably.
The number we've seen 2 weeks out of Fro, and so many stat boosts coming out of him.
So many stat boosts, also so many free turns from things like that Dancer. That Oricorio, like, it didn't put in as much work as it did in week 1. It was still scary. It was still really good. But with that all said, it is unfortunate, or fortunate, depending on whose side you choose to root for, that Fro did end up losing. Reckless Trico did take the set 2-1.
Meaning Trico is one of 6 people this week to have a 2-0 record.
Yes, out of the 26 players, after 2 weeks, it has already been culled down to only 6 remaining who have not lost a set yet. Now, these people, of course, may have lost a game, but they have not lost a full set.
Game losses don't matter if you win the set.
Not entirely wrong.
Let's hope not. Resistance is a hell of a drug.
Very true. Moving on, we have the Tartarus Tandemouse versus the Spikemuth Sylveons.
With Spikemuth Sylveons being led by Sky and bringing the Iron Hands, the Iron Jugulus, Venomoth, Scizor, Gyarados, and Gardevoir.
Mm-hmm. The Tartarus Tandemouse is led by, you know who he is. He's the dude who did the Stantler stuff last week, and by God, he's back at it again. On his team, he does have this. Yeah, you want to see him do it again? He's going to do it again. Spoilers. We do see the Stantler and Gardecuno. Alongside that are Sylveon, Garchomp, Pachirisu, and Sneasler. And going right back into it, game 1, he tries it again. He tries it again. But this time it fails, as the lead from Sky are 2 Pokemon that have Quirk Drive. And a little known fact, Quirk Drive is one of those special abilities that cannot be separated from its user. So the skill swap does fail against them. Still, There was some very cool stuff seen from this Stantler. Most
Don't worry.
notably, the fact that it was continuously skill swapping with Unova's own partner to keep resetting Intimidate. Like, effectively cycling it, but instead of constantly switching out and putting another Pokemon at danger, just having this thing sit on the field and passively put -1, -1, -1. And that definitely stacked. That definitely did some stuff.
Absolutely. Not to mention just the general power of this team.
Yeah, it definitely is one that is unorthodox compared to what you'd usually expect, but it was clearly crafted very intelligently.
No shade on Sky, but her matchups, weeks 1 and weeks 1 and 2, they have just not really been in her favor. Like, she has options to, of course, try, but they've been against such unorthodox yet powerful teams. Like, last week, she was against the Reggie team. And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we mentioned our thoughts about last week. And it was, I don't think it was explicitly said that Link's team was very directly offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And this week, the same thing happens. You have the Sylveon, the Articuno, the Sneasler, and the Garchomp that are just, they line up almost too well into what Sky brings.
It's very true. The matchup here was definitely in Yuno's favor, but it's very clear that without the innovation and the clever team building and thinking that Yuno has had, that none of this would have been possible. As I mentioned, for game one, the Stantler kept skill swapping back and forth with its own teammates to keep getting Intimidate on and off again. But that was only until Sky didn't have two Pokemon on the field who had Quark Drive. Once this was no longer the case, and Intimidate could be put on one of them, it did. Gardecuno did get its competitive boost, and god damn it, this time there's an Adrenaline Orb. I cannot believe this worked again, as the Gardecuno in Game 1 got all 4 of the KOs again. Like, we get it. We're putting this thing in S+ tier next season. We understand.
We didn't think in preseason, Limevolt took, was it the Greninja that you cooked straight into a higher tier?
yes. The Greninja was initially slated to be a B tier, but after we realized the power of Loaded Dice Water Shuriken, we decided that alone was enough to justify it in A tier. I'm not saying outright that Articuno should be bumped up a tier, but more than anything, Stantler is questionable. Like, it's solid. It has some cool stuff going for it, but it's still a Stantler, right? Like, in C tier, it's a good utility mon. It has an alright typing and a good ability. If that thing is in B tier, I don't know if anyone is ever picking it.
Would you like to see this happen again?
I suppose we'll see going into week 3. But before we do that, game 2.
MVP this time was not the Articuno.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to MVP, it would be the Terrafire Sylveon.
Yep, it worked great, like we mentioned. Sky's team is solid, but
the Sylveon, it just did not take enough damage to go down. It kept living.
Yeah, it just kept going and going and going. And when you look at it a little bit more closely, Terrafire's Sylveon tears through Sky's team. I mean, you of course have the Scizors 4 times weak to fire, but then you also have the Venomoth who's weak to fire. And then not even counting that, just looking at its base typing of Fairy, because remember, you keep your base typing when you Terra. So this thing's effectively Fairy Fire. And Fairy beats both Jugulus and Hands. Like, Sylveon matched up surprisingly well into this week, and it's a testament to the strength of competitive, more than anything, the fact that Gardecuno was able to steal the show in game 1.
Absolutely. Yuno just took everything on the team and pops out with some of the most, like, intricate, yet I won't say easy to play, but you can see the lines in the team.
I mean, we say that, but we also were looking at it with hindsight. It's difficult to know just how hard it is to pilot this team, given how unorthodox it is. But
and how good of a player Yuno is.
Yeah, it may just be that it's unorthodox to us. This may be completely comfortable for Unova. I mean, it's clear that they're a strong player, as they are one of the 6 players who are currently 2-0 after week 2.
Yep, the second to be featured in the 2-0 record.
Mm-hmm. And of course, with that, apologies. With that said, it is quite obvious at this point that it was a 2-0 victory. I don't wish for Sky to be discouraged. Definitely some solid lines here, but weeks 1 and 2 just really didn't pan out for her.
No.
Now, next match, we get to see the Bodacious Bulbasaurs, coached by Amelia, versus the Kill Team King Gambits, coached by Nilly, otherwise known as the person I brutalized last week. I apologize, I'm still paying for the medical bills for them.
Nilly is, of course, bringing the Iron Hands, Pincurchin, Hydreigon, Venonat, Sableye, and Delphox.
On the other side of the field, we have Amelia, who has the Hisuian Typhlosion, Sneasler, Rillaboom, Rotom Fan, Earthworm, and Overquill.
Now, Venonat was a Pokemon that we hyped up a lot after Jamie Boyd picked it during the drafting phase. Nilly picked it up after Jamie, and I'm glad we got to see it on a team, to be honest.
I mean, I suppose that's something that can be said.
We haven't seen it from Jamie.
Right. I mean, all I'm saying, there was some talk. Like, I remember in Jamie's own video discussing his team, they mentioned that Foongus and Venonat do basically the same thing, yet they're separated by 2 tiers in between them. And I understand that point of view, but it's very clear that they're not quite of the same caliber as Venonat. It struggles to do a lot. Not only having a way worse defensive typing, but also just lower stats across the board.
And it doesn't even have Regenerator.
I mean, I wouldn't say Regenerate is the most important thing. Having the compound eyes to basically give it Spore is definitely very helpful, just not something that would be necessary on Foongus itself.
Yeah, Constellation Prize.
Yeah, it's not bad. I'm not trying to say that it's a bad Pokemon at all. I'm not trying to necessarily defend the E-tier it was in. In all honesty, it probably should have been D at the very least, but I do want to dispel a little bit about how much hype it's gotten, because it's still only a little guy. We've seen little guys do plenty. Yeah, we've seen little guys do plenty in this league, but not all of them are quite up to snuff, so to speak. Regardless, going back to the game. Game 1, we saw a very supportive Overquill, not only having the Intimidate ability, but it was running both Icy Wind and Acid Spray. Just tons of debuffs across the board, just trying to do anything to try and support its team.
Unfortunately, they didn't really do what they needed to do. The Sableye ignored the majority of the Icy Winds just by quashing whatever its ally was going to hit. And then,
this was something that we saw very prominently both in games 1 and 2. Just the fact that Quash being on the field basically eliminated Amelia's attempts to get up speed control. I mean, you got a question. Like, would a couple of Terra Darks on the team help to here, or even just trying to taunt? Like Frisk on the Hisuian Typhlosion allows Amelia to know whether or not a Mental Herb would be in play for the Sableye, so having taunt available, even just as an option, would have been really nice. But both games 1 and 2, we saw the same thing happen. Sableye and Delphox, they just proved to be Amelia's complete undoing, as she really didn't have the tools to try and deal with them.
And then the Acid Spray from the Overquill, it certainly was really cool.
But yeah, it was a cool tech, but yeah,
there
just
weren't
didn't
enough
much.
special attackers really to line up for that.
I mean, when you have a team with Rillaboom, Sneasler, and Earthworm, I don't know if I would even be running Acid Spray. I feel like at that point, something like Screech may have been better, if it even learns it.
I cannot tell you off the top of my head, but even a more offensive move, or just basically not Acid Spray, it of course could line up with the Typhlosion and the Rotom. Typhlosion, of course, we did see it, but they just didn't really do what they needed to do. And going back, the Sableye invalidated the speed control, which that is, of course, you can try to play around the Sableye, and getting up Icy Winds is, of course, nice if Sableye is not on the field. But the Sableye just stuck around as well.
Yeah, that was something we really saw, is that Amelia just wasn't willing to target down the Pokemon that were actually threatening her. Like, Game 1, the Delphox was left completely alone to just run about and do whatever it wanted, and Game 2, the same thing pretty much happened with Sableye, as it was able to position its teammates well to the point that Delphox was able to just clean up in the endgame. really, this battle feels like, I'm not going to say it was decided at team preview, but it definitely was in Nilly's favor, and Nilly clearly played to their outs quite well.
I won't say team preview, but probably by like between preview and turn one, as there was just not much that could be done.
I think that's definitely fair. Overall, a good showing from Nilly. I apologize what happened in week 1. It will happen again if we face again. It will happen again. Regardless of that, though.
Same exact strat. Good luck.
Yes. Regardless of that, though, Nilly did take the win 2-0. Moving on to the next match. We have Tenacity, coach of the Dancing Dragonites, facing against
your boy MF with the Nottingham Nickets.
Mm-hmm. What was their roster?
The Nickets bringing Urshifu, Salamence, Raichu, Palisand, Rotom Mo, and Colossal.
Oh, Colossal, a Pokemon dear to my heart, but I'm going to have to set that bias aside for now. As facing them was Tenacity, who had Gastrodon East, which is objectively incorrect, Fluttermane, Iron Jugulus, I'm not going to lie, I almost called it Hydreigon, Glastrier, Gothorita, and Bronzong.
I almost called it Hydreigon as well. Going into this, we see very much Trick Room versus offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, game 1, we saw something that no one would ever believe. We saw a Fluttermane do stupid damage.
That Urshifu died.
That thing's children are dead. That thing's ancestors are dead squared. Fluttermane does damage. Who would have thought?
The Urshifu switched in, and without a Focus Sash, switching into a Fluttermane, didn't quite
it's bold move, yes. Switching a Mon that is very weak to Fairy when a Fluttermane's on the field. Very aggressive play that didn't end up panning out.
Nope.
Now, one thing that was
approximately a billion% done.
Mm-hmm. One thing we did see, which was a bit more interesting, was the Raichu clicking Surf. Now, Tenacity tried to dissuade this, or at the very least capitalize on it a bit by having the Gastrodon, but the Surf was able to put in some pretty good work as the Palisand was there to have a Luminous Moss activate alongside Water Compaction, so that's already a +2 boost to its defense and a +1 to its special attack, and then the Palisand clicks Amnesia, combining that with Shore Up and a Light Screen, and yeah, defend the castle, it's being defended all right.
Throwbacks to the Sword and Shield days, that Palisand just kept living. It did not want to die.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was one turn where Fluttermane died to Thunderbolt from Raichu, which, admittedly, despite being a roll, ended up being a pretty solid play, as it allowed the Palisand the time it needed to recoup and just try and completely take over the game. But that didn't necessarily happen. Tenacity saw this castle, and they just pulled out the Trebuchet. Yawn from the Gastrodon did what it can to try and keep it down. Smart pivoting and heal pulse from Gothorita, though, is really just what ended up causing Tenacity to be able to wall up against the castle. Because Palisand, despite being really difficult to break, didn't have a lot of breaking power itself.
It was, unfortunately, all on its own, and it just could not do it.
Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for that Gothorita putting out the heal pulses, it's possible it would have gotten it, but since its recovery was being matched by something else, well, as we mentioned, it couldn't quite do the damage it needed, so Game 1 did end up going to Tenacity. Now, Game 2, we saw a little bit of a different use from Surf.
Speaking of Sword and Shield, you want to see Colossal with the Steam Engine weakness policy?
Well, there was no weakness policy in Game 2, to be fair. It teared out of its water weakness, but despite that, it was still able to get the huge speed boost from Steam Engine. By that point, the Raichu putting out Nuzzle Paralysis plus Rock Slide flinches just allow MF to weaken T's team to the point where Salamence and Raichu were able to clean up.
It was pretty brutal, honestly. The
Hmm.
Colossal just did what it needed to do.
Yeah. And
Tearing
then
out of its quad weakness certainly helped it.
hmm And then game three, we see Surf, part three. This time, the Colossal chose not to Terra, instead taking the 4 times weakness hit to activate a policy. Now, there isn't any Vocalith here, but like I mentioned, this is still something very close to my heart. Seeing Surf next to a Colossal always gets me choked up. But despite that, it just wasn't quite enough. Bronzong's Trick Room was something that MF clearly was not ready to deal with, and especially not at game three, where there wouldn't be any time left to try and adapt to it. It just ended up being too much, and T was able to very convincingly take game three and the set.
Trick Room went up, and he
That's the
just
end of the story.
could not keep up. The Glastrier, of course, a very good Trick Room option. Gastrodon, of course, very slow, matches up good with Trick Room. And
Mm-hmm.
the rest was just there.
Pretty much.
This was another one of those teams that we mentioned in the preseason, though, with the Fluttermane being paired with a ton of Trick Room options.
Yes, it is interesting that compared to what we had initially expected, the Fluttermane, well, like we said, doesn't quite work with Trick Room, but it clearly wasn't here for Trick Room, as it got brought during the games where Trick Room wasn't really something that was ever on the table. Rather, it was just being used as that silver bullet to try and pierce through MF's roster. So who knows? Maybe the people who have the Fluttermane saw our advice, or maybe they were planning this from the start to not use it necessarily for Trick Room, but just to use it sort of like as an offensive outlet to help Trick Room get up, or to maybe even, clean up in the end game when Trick Room is about to go down.
Yep. Tenacity might have known all along what they were going to do with the Fluttermane, and it really works out for them.
Mm-hmm.
This was a 2-1 game going to the Dancing Dragonites.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads into our next game.
Yep, that
The
would, of course, being the Wishing
Wishing
Well
Well
washing
Washing
machine.
Machines
Say it 5 times fast. I won't give you anything. They're
versus
being coached
the
by Jake.
versus the Dublin Blades, coached by Cell,
Mm-hmm.
with Cell bringing Regieleki, Tornadus Therian, Overquill, Beartic, Sableye, and Doug Trio.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and thank you for specifying Tornadus Therian, because Jake's side has the Tornadus Incarnate, alongside a male Basculegion, Dreadnought, Gudra, Raichu again, and Spupa. Now, game one, we immediately see a really good Terra from the Tornadus, going into Dark to try and deny the Sableye's Prankster, and as we did see, it denied a trick that the Sableye tried to immediately go into it. Probably just trying to lock it into Tailwind. Now, speaking of, something you don't see too often. Game one, Jake's Tornadus. The Pokemon notorious for clicking Tailwind. The Pokemon whose Tailwind may as well be its signature move. Didn't click Tailwind in game one. Something that you really don't see that often.
Not once did it go up.
Mm-hmm.
This was an interesting game, though, actually. We did see a semi-rain team versus a rain team. Cell, of
Yeah,
course,
it's very
having
true.
the Beartic plus Tornadus Therian.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily call Cell's team a rain team per se, but
It
I think the
has rain
Beartic
options.
It has rain options, but I think the intent actually was never to set their own rain. I think it's actually a really smart idea to include the Beartic here, specifically to try and take advantage of Jake's rain that they set up themselves, basically giving the Beartic a free +2 speed boost for nothing on Cell's end. I think it was definitely a smart, try sort of counter team play that they went for.
Cell did their Tornadus did set the Trick Room or the Tailwind. So of course,
Mm-hmm.
when Beartic comes out,
Yeah, that thing was so
Swiftwind,
fast.
Tailwind, it had it all.
Mm-hmm.
And
Going on.
and I have very few notes for this game, I'll be honest. The bulk of Gudra shown in these games was insane.
I don't blame you. I mean, if we want to scooch over to game 2 real quick, more than just seeing Gudra's own bulk, we saw Acid Armor Gudra. And then following Acid Armor Gudra, we saw Body Press Acid Armor Gudra. Something, I'm going to be real, I didn't even realize this thing learned Body Press. I thought that was a
Neither did
Hisuian
I.
Gudra exclusive. But the fact that this thing basically did Iron Defense Body Press was hilarious, and certainly unexpected, at least for me.
Oh, it was great.
Mm-hmm. Now, something we saw as well in Game 2 is that Overquill, where the Bodacious Bulbasaurs had their Overquill be pretty much purely a support Pokemon. Here, it really showed that it's able to do more than that, as it was doing huge damage and just being a really good, solid offensive threat for Cell.
Oh, Overcool has Swift Swim too.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even realize that, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I highlighted the Beartic as the main thing to, quote-unquote, abuse the rain, but yeah, there were several options there. And they're both Pokemon that have solid abilities outside of Rain. That's a lie. I just remember Beartic has nothing outside of Rain, unless you count
it has
snow. Solid, I guess, if you're running Snow. But now, that doesn't work out quite well, does it? Foreshadowing!
Yeah,
apologies there.
Indeed.
This was another set that went into a Game 3 scenario where turn 1, we saw a really weird play from Jake as they teared their Gudra trying to avoid a Regieleki, because the Regieleki was revealed previously to be Terra Ice. And so, Gudra being a dragon type, it's weak, it's whatever. So they tried to Terra out, but I don't know if that's necessarily a good play, as Gudra is still a great special walls, and even with no special defense investment, it's still solid. And I don't know about you, but after my opponent reveals Body Press Gudra, I don't think I'm ever tearing my Aleki into ice, of all things.
I don't think you would want to see, unless it's, it's going to KO or do partner into another attack. I don't think you would want to see your Regieleki be the Terra unless you know it's going to secure something. You only, of course, get one Terra per game. You don't want to waste it. And wasting it on a Gudra that's probably not going to get KO'd from full, maybe even like 75%. It's just not worth the investment, I believe.
Right, it was certainly an odd play. I wouldn't necessarily call it bad per se, because it at least had intent. It's just that the play didn't end up working out. As well, something I want to mention, because Game 1, this was not really confirmed. By Game 2, this was confirmed. By the end of Game 2, we had seen all 4 moves from Jake's Tornadus. Tailwind wasn't one of them.
That is a
breaking the law of humanity. Jake brought a Tornadus incarnate to a game and didn't have it no Tailwind. What? I mean, I'm not going to say that it was an outright misplay. I'm not going to say that it was a bad thing to do. Okay, I am going to say it was a bad thing to do, because why would you do that? But I mean, evidently they may know more than me, as they did end up taking this set with a 2-1 victory.
Even Defiant Tornadus back in the day ran Tailwind.
Why would you not? I mean, it's just such a good, solid move. But, I mean, Jake clearly had different plans, and they were able to execute them. As, I suppose, having the rain for Swift Swim on both Basculegion and Dreadnought was the only speed control they really cared for. Now, the Torn was, of course, able to do just that. In the last moments of Game 3, it was able to set up its rain and let Dreadnought just clean up. And thanks to a flinch from Rock Slide, the Dreadnought was actually able to come back from a situation which could have been considered a bit dicey, but that flinch did end up happening.
It should not have come back.
One could definitely argue that, but that's the game we play.
There's a rock slide, there's a way.
When there's a rock slide, there's a way. Yes, the game did end up going to Jake. Congrats, good job on the victory. We look forward to seeing what you're doing. Cell, we're sorry. We hate to see it. No one's ever happy when games come down to what could really just be considered hacks, but still, it's the game we play. It's just something you got to accept.
It was a 2-1 though, so of course.
Yes, it was by no means a blowout. It was definitely close from both players. This was a super even match, all things considered.
Absolutely. All of these games, I think I've said it for everyone so far, but these games are just so much fun to watch, especially
Absolutely.
especially knowing some of these players. It's like you kind of have an idea of their thought process just by, like, of course, talking to them, and then seeing them act out in these ways is just like the Tornadus. You would never see a Tornadus and expect it to not have Tailwind. It's not even one of those niche decisions that you make in like BGC of, yeah, it's a popular move, but my team doesn't really need it.
Yeah, no, like it's pretty much just always an auto include, but the sheer, for lack of a better term, uniqueness of Draft League allows for some really unorthodox sets to pull through, and I suppose you could definitely say that's something we saw here. I mean, it's something we saw with Unova, for example. Stantler! Why is that thing putting in work? I'm not over it.
I think we bypassed it, actually. The Stantler actually cleaned up, I think it was the last game, with Giga Impact.
Yeah, I purposefully did not want to mention it, as when I saw that, I was just pissed. I was like, I was just that scene of Jesse, just, he can't keep getting away with it! Like, I just could not believe my eyes when I saw that. I wanted that to not get mentioned.
I noted the Sylveon, and I forgot to note down the Stantler.
Oh, I noted it.
Giga Impact.
It was in my notes.
Oh, I can't even say that poor thing. Moving on.
Yes. Great play from both players, both Jake and Cell. But yes, going forward.
Wait, was Jake another player that made? Nope, never mind. I was checking up on something.
You're good.
We have next up Jamie Boyd's team of the Southampton Smugleafs versus the Golden Goomies,
who are led by Ian. Notably, they are led by Ian, not Fro, who is the captain of the other Goomy team, and I definitely did not write Fro's name as the captain of the Golden Goomies in my notes. That definitely didn't happen, and I definitely didn't just catch this.
Jamie Boyd, of course, bringing Baxcalibur, Basque Legion Female, Goldango, Moltres, Kilowattrel, and Gatita.
Yes, and Ian, not Fro, Ian, captain of the Golden Goomies, not the Giddy Goomies, brought Amoonguss, Arcanine, Galarian Articuno, Tinkaton, Gyarados, and Chestnut.
Strap in, folks. This Goomy bit is lasting the entire season.
I don't want it to last the entire season. Unfortunately, I'm stupid. Regardless, someone who isn't stupid, Jamie Boyd, as game one, he immediately had a great play using Goldango as a pivot into Spore, making really good use of its ability.
Followed up by Ian showing off Terra Ground Stomping Tantrum Amoonguss.
Yeah, I was very shocked by that, but I mean, I suppose it's something. You know, Spore failed because of Good as Gold, so why not just go ahead and use Stomping Tantrum, which does over 70% to the Goldango.
When I watch
some reason.
When I watch these games, I set the speed to fast. I almost missed it. I just watched Goldango's health drop. I went, hold up, and actually just read through them. Like, I highlighted that. Freaking
It was absurd.
Used Stomping Tantrum. I went, huh?
But again, that goes back to what we were saying. Just so many unique and unorthodox plays and move decisions and team building decisions can be made in draft leagues. And it's always really cool to see it.
Absolutely.
Moving on from that play, though, Ian was able to get up the Trick Room. However, Boyd was able to maneuver through it successfully, and it did end up taking game 1.
Pretty
Definitely
cleanly,
thanks.
actually.
Yeah, and it was definitely thanks to Kilo Wattrel. It did great things here. The Terror was really good. It just did solid damage. It was able to live what it needed to. Maybe this thing should have been a higher tier than it was. Who knows? But that's definitely something in hindsight, and I think there are other Pokemon, especially other flying-type Pokemon, that might be on the team that Boyd was facing this week that I would, take out back first.
And we did get to see in this game as well another competitive boost.
Another Pokemon who's a flying type who had competitive. This time it wasn't the Gardecuno, though. This time it was the Kilowattrel. And yeah, competitive went crazy here. It O-code the Arcanine. And, I mean, something I need to mention there, right? During that turn, there was Kilowattrel and there was Basculegion. And then on Ian's side of the field, there was Arcanine and Chestnut, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Kilowattrel with competitive O-code the Arcanine, and then Basculegion wave crashed into Chestnut, which would be a terrible play, but it's actually pretty solid when you consider that Kilowattrel might not have killed. That Kilowattrel did so much damage that even Jamie Boyd wasn't fully expecting it. Because I don't know anyone who would wave crash into Chestnut, but I do know someone who would wave crash into an Arcanine, and I think that'd be most people. So yeah, just crazy things there.
Yep.
God damn! I wrote Fro's name again in my notes here. I don't want this bit to last, but evidently it's going to.
Oh.
Regardless,
Fro,
I wanted to
Ian,
mention.
you two are getting your roles taken away as soon as possible, I can tell you that. The season,
regardless of that, though,
top
yes.
8's going to start, and if neither of you are in it, your roles are gone.
I mean, we say top 8, but we aren't even completely sure if it's going to be top 8. It could be top 8, could be top 12. There's even been a tiny bit of talk about top 16. There's no way to know as of now, as it isn't quite set in stone.
Always interesting.
Regardless, going back to game 2 for a moment, we saw a really interesting play from Ian, as they used Fake Out and Wide Guard. 2 great moves, but when used on the same turn, it's questionable. I mean, either of these moves are normally used to protect an ally who's trying to go for a big play, but when both are used, nothing really gets done, and this play, which ended up being super passive, was really, really bad. At least it turned out really bad, as Boyd was able to punish it heavily by just going for a nasty plot with Goldango. And from that point, Boyd, with the boosted Goldango, just couldn't be stopped and got a very clean 2-0 victory.
It is again to note this week that Jamie Boyd did bring weakness policy Goldango again.
Again, yes. However, I can actually confirm this as I'm a league staff member, and the teams do need to get submitted to a league staff member, so I can say Gothita didn't have foul play this week, so I don't really know what the play was to try and trigger the weakness policy. Who knows? Maybe they were anticipating stomping Tantrum Amoongus.
I would assume Arcanine? Does he have a way to proc it on his own?
I would have to double check, but I'm not entirely sure. It's very possible he does. I'm willing to believe he does. I mean, it's been said that Boyd's a very strong player, so just having a nothing item there is definitely something that I wouldn't initially expect. At least especially not unless there's a reason for it. Mm-hmm.
It could have also been prepping for something else to come. Of course.
Yeah, who knows?
These are wider rosters than just the 6 you bring.
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
But games...
This league is also bigger than just these 2 players, as we do have another 2 to get to.
Of course, Jamie Boyd did win 2-0 over Ian.
Mm-hmm. And they're in that exclusive 6, who are currently facing Season 3, and more specifically, Week 3, going into it without any losses, being 2-0.
Yep. Next up, we have the Shanghai Shedinja versus the Children of Arceus. The Shanghai Shedinja, of course, being Ninja's team.
Mm-hmm. And the Children of Arceus being Valorn's team. I believe it's Valorn.
We did
But
not get confirmation from this player,
yeah.
which goes to show they don't watch the podcast, so they're getting booted from the server.
True! Imagine not watching this. I mean, come on, this is the peak of content. What do you mean that there's no visuals? Ignore that part.
Ninja Meerkat bringing the Lycanroc, Scyther, Greninja, Electros, a Alolan Persian, and Gallade.
Mm-hmm. And before I even say Valorn's roster, I think something to note about what Ninja brought, or more specifically, what Ninja didn't bring, as Ninja did not bring their S tier at all. Like, it's one thing to have it on the team and then just not bring it to either game for whatever reason. Maybe it just doesn't have the bad matchup. You know, maybe it just has a bad matchup, or maybe you're just not quite feeling it.
Maybe you're me during Season 3 of the WSSL.
Yeah, but who knows? It just didn't see play. It's not that it didn't see play. It just didn't see the field at all. It didn't get brought. It's a bold decision, but also a questionable one. I mean, not bringing your S tier kind of raises the question of, do you regret the S tier you picked? Did you think that it wasn't good enough? Or maybe, I don't know. It's definitely speculation on our end, but we'll see how it ended up turning out. Game 1. So week 1, Ninja had some very unfortunate luck, right? Like, they lost a game that they otherwise, one could argue they definitely should have won.
Week 2?
Yeah, week 2, game 1, Lycanroc. Lycanroc misses its Rock Slide on the Volcarona and gets burned by Flamethrower.
And you want to see some Hydro Pump hits?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Because we didn't.
Like, Ninja was making solid plays all throughout this game, but their luck just wasn't there. Despite that, though, and even despite being burned, Lycanroc was able to put in some work. It still KO'd the Volcarona, and it was able to get rid of the Hydreigon. Now,
being
as was
does
mentioned,
not mean you're out of the game.
Yeah, Greninja did miss two Hydro Pumps, but Gallade was able to clean up the game, so no worries there. But one thing I want to linger on real quick for game 1 was the Scyther. This thing was running Leer. We're not on Route 1, man. This isn't a bug catching contest. I mean, if there was some calc that this was intended for, props to you. I want to see it. Because why are you running Leer?
Yeah, Ninja, you're DMing me about this?
I don't know. Regardless of that, though.
We're going to have a talk.
Yeah. As was mentioned, Gallade was able to clean up game 1, so even despite the bad luck, Ninja was able to get it. Game 2, we saw something very odd. So, Valorn has the Volcarona, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Greninja was an Ice type at this given moment. I believe it was clicking Ice Beam, and I believe it was choice locked.
I believe so as well.
Right. And so, when you have a Volcarona on the field, and they have an Ice type Greninja, do you click a Fire move into the Greninja? Or do you Giga Drain into the Scyther?
You might expect to see a Fire-type move into the Ice-type Greninja.
But nope, we see a Giga Drain into the Scyther, who wasn't even terrored out of its Bug Flying type, so it was a 4 times resistance. I mean, I'm calling it a misplay, but it's possible the turn just didn't work out. I mean, Valorn had to have seen something we didn't. I mean, who knows? Maybe they were predicting Scyther to switch out into Lycanroc? I don't know. There had to be some reason.
I didn't remember off the top of my head the exact situation, but I was going to say maybe they could have read a switch.
That's my only guess, but as we saw with things...
a Heat Wave could come out from Volcarona and just take a double KO, switching into Lycanroc could have been an option.
It's possible, but as we saw, for example, last week. Yeah, as we saw, for example, last week with, I believe it was Ian who fell victim to this, trying to look too far ahead into the future and getting too reliant on your reads can sometimes just cause the plays that are simple and easy and right in front of your face to just slip under. Like, it's very important to look at what your opponent's going to do and try and play around that, but you also have to look at your own win condition and your own best case scenarios.
Yep. You play to your outs and don't outthink yourself.
Yeah, it's very true. Not getting in your own head is definitely something that is very important overall. But overall, Ninja just was able to do exactly what we were saying. They were able to have a very solid game plan, and they were able to play it out to the best of their ability. Game 2, both Greninja and Lycanroc just do a ton of damage, and Valen really didn't have an answer for it. The set goes to Ninja.
In 2-0 fashion.
Mm-hmm. And now, for what may as well be considered the match of the week. A game that I wrote so many words for that I have to actually go ahead and extend the view in my notes tab to fit them all on the screen. Here we see the Miami Heatrans, coached by Nine, versus the Inazuma Iron Hands, coached by Robbie. Both staff members, both previous winners, both insanely strong players. And seeing them fight in week 2 is absurd. This is a fight that you would expect to see in week 8 to decide who's not going to go undefeated. But we see this in week 2, which, I mean, if that isn't Swiss, then what is?
Swiss is always amazing with the most obnoxious pairings coming out. You see it in every tournament ever.
Pretty much. But regardless of whether or not this should have happened now or later, it's definitely a treat that we get to see it this early.
Yep.
Now, going directly into the games. Game 1, we saw Urshifu from Robbie get a great Terra Grass to stop the Rage Powder from Brute Bonnet from messing with it. However, Heatran was able to then just come in next, and despite Urshifu having Poison Jab to stop Terra Fairy Heatran, which, by the way, great prediction from Robbie. That Heatran was still Steel type when the Urshifu was clicking Poison Jab, but they knew that it was going to go Terra Fairy, and they got the turn right, but it just ended up not being enough as, you know, the Bramblegast tries to get an attack boost from the Heat Wave, but Heatran is Heatran, right? Like, that thing is terrifying. That thing is scary. And going back to the Bramblegast for a moment, Robbie clicked Giga Impact with it. This is the second person this week clicking Giga Impact. And I don't even know why. The Bramblegast didn't even manage to do 40% to Brute Bonnet.
Maybe this is where a Leer could have come in handy?
Oh, come on. I mean, who knows? Regardless, though, Heatran just blew a hole through Robbie's team. Magnezone was able to barely hang on from a critical hit Aqua Step, and despite Bonnet trying to fling around Spores, Magnezone and Screamtail, despite that Heatran doing great damage right up front, Magnezone and Screamtail from Robbie were able to clean up the battle, giving him a great comeback from what looked to be a position where he was so far behind.
I do want to say from Robbie, this is the second week in a row that you've seen the Urshifu packing a move that you don't typically see on Urshifu. Week 1, it was Aerial Ace. And this week, you see the Poison Jab.
Yeah, I mean, Aerial Ace isn't a move too unfamiliar for some singles players, you know. If I recall correctly, Gen 8, it was actually ran a lot in singles to deal with, what was it, Buzzwole. But yeah, not something you see...
of course.
Yeah, not something you see super often in doubles. And Poison Jab is something you basically never see in doubles. So, yeah, like was said, great play from Robbie. You know, we were sort of critiquing some players for over-predicting in previous matches, but I suppose Robbie here is showing the best case scenario. What happens when those predictions that you go for end up panning out? As if the Urshifu had just clicked like close combat into that Heatran, I'm not confident that the game would have gone in his favor.
Absolutely, it would not have. That game, these players brought all of the games so close.
Oh, absolutely. Like this, they were just insane. Like, going into Game 2, for example, we saw just how good their prep was, as 9 put just a little bit more bulk into their Goltris than Robbie must have expected, as it was able to live a Dazzling Gleam and a Close Combat at 6%. Probably just giving it a little bit of a buffer to deal with any high rolls from either end, but still, that shows just how prepared these players were. As Robbie pretty much, you know, tried to go for what he knew to get rid of the Goltris, and 9 anticipating that was able to creep it.
Power creep and even defense creep can really help something out.
Yeah, I mean,
And
let's say, for example, your opponent is planning for your Pokemon to have, let's say, 252 HP and 4 special defense. Well, if that's what their calc is, if you go like 252 HP and even like 12 special defense, that has potential to just throw off all their stuff. So,
a
like, having the
six,
awareness of when to do that is definitely an important thing.
a 6% chance to miss the KO suddenly becomes 100.
Absolutely. Diving a bit further into game 2, though, 9 was able to get up Trick Room, but Robbie immediately reversed it with Scream Tail. And after that, Trick Room goes back up. And something I want to mention, despite Aqua Step giving the Quaquaval +1 speed, Quaquaval somehow manages to underspeed Magnezone in Trick Room.
I believe
How
that.
how fast did Robbie make that thing? And how slow did the Quaquaval have to be on 9's end? Like, I wasn't even confident that was possible.
I don't remember it too clearly, but I remember they were talking about it in the server because they were both amazed by it as well.
Yeah, I mean, looking back at it now, at level 50, Magnezone has a maximum possible speed of 123, and Quaquaval has a minimum possible speed of 81. So with that +1 speed boost, the Quaquaval is 1 point slower than the Magnezone. Which, crazy. Seeing a Magnezone go after a Quaquaval, who's +1 speed, in Trick Room. What?
The Quaquaval was no speed investment.
Yeah, it had to have been min speed minus speed nature, 0 IV, while Magnezone was max possible speed. That's the only way this could have happened.
The theory was I would outspeed everything at +1 and still underspeed stuff in Trick Room.
Well, I mean, I suppose it ended up working out as
It
thanks
was
to the Trick Room.
It was four speed, 31 IVs.
I see. Well, that might have just made it a speed tie then. I'm unsure. Maybe the math works out. I'm not going to claim to know there. Regardless of that, though, thanks to the Trick Room, 9 was able to clean up Game 2, and, of course, as you'd expect nothing less from these players, Game 3 was also crazy.
It was so...
Robbie brings Citadel to the match, and elects to try and Ice Shard into his own Cerulege for weak armor, but oddly elects not to Terra into something weak to Ice for a weakness policy. Usually this is just grass, but it's possible that they were fearing, Sludge Bomb or Air Slash from the Galarian Slowking and Galarian Moltres, respectively. But it was a risk, though, as with its base typing, the Cerulege is still weak to Goltress's other stab, and 9 ended up getting the turn right, both setting up Trick Room and going for Fiery Wrath.
Yep, that turn went pretty poor. I believe Robbie did get some damage out.
Yeah, I'm not going to say no damage happened. It wasn't like the worst possible case scenario, but it was pretty close to it, as everything went almost perfectly for 9 that turn.
Which I will say, foreshadowing a little bit, that damage was actually bad damage.
Yeah, it did cause Berserk to be able to be triggered later in the battle.
But not only that, it was just enough damage, along with whatever hit. Again, the Moltres, I believe, got 2 Berserk boosts in that game.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, I mean, after the Trick Room went up, it was very clear that the match was slated to go in 9's favor. The Screamtail tried to get rid of it, but it was too late. And the gamble Robbie played of playing 3 Mons to 4 to try and have Citadel do stuff really just didn't end up working out, and it may have been the thing which costed Robbie the game and the set. But overall, it was a very back-and-forth set. And in the end, despite 9 managing to take it, it was something that still could have gone either way.
I will say, even if Robbie did blow the Terra, though, it wouldn't have worked out as Trick Room just went up. And now you're +2 speed, and again, weak to the Moltres. With all of your boosts, you don't want to switch out.
It's true. It's very possible that if a weakness policy boost was in order, then it's possible that it may have been able to OHKO the Galarian Slowking, but that's not something I'm super confident in saying.
I'm not.
Regardless,
I was still counting on Trick Room going up.
Right. Regardless, though, It's super rare to see Robbie get a loss this early in the season, but we're just going to have to see how he plays to try and make up for it. It's very early, and no one is even close to being out of it yet. With that said, though, with this clash of the Titans finishing in Nine's favor, they are the next player who are currently undefeated.
Yep, Robbie has been kicked from possible 2-0.
Mm-hmm.
But we still expect to see Robbie go incredibly positive.
Oh, obviously. I'm not confident Robbie has ever had a single season where he didn't dominate. I mean, I think at WSSDL Season 2 was his worst, and he still made playoffs despite that. If I recall correctly, that's actually the season he won. Like, he was doing poorly at the start of the season, and he ended up coming back in the latter half of the main season and won the whole thing. Let me go ahead and verify that real quick. Yep, it's true. He was the Season 2 champion there. So, again, that just goes to show how strong of a player Robbie is. Definitely keep your eye out for him.
And then we have our only video for this week, actually.
Not true.
Our only video posted into the replay submissions.
Yes, the other one wasn't content. Reckless Trico, we apologize. Week 1, we did not mention your video. That was our bad, but hey, at the very least, we're mentioning it now. Reckless Trico did have a video up for Week 1, and they also do have a video up for Week 2, which is, as of right now, one of 2 people that made a video for Week 2. The other being Costa, the coach of the Athens Victinis, and one of the players in this next match.
Yep, versus the Stockholm Sprigatitos.
Mm-hmm. Of course, being coached by Kemmel.
Would you like?
Speaking of, yes, Kemmel's team features Landorus Therian, Pelipper, Copper Berserker, Bascule Legion Male, and Wordier.
You had enough with Stantler, and he agreed. He wanted Wordier.
Yep, we do have to deal with the evolution now.
This is, of course, going against Costa with Azumarill, Vivian, Salamence, Rotom, Morgrim, and Annihilate. Salamence being, of course, named Sally throughout this entire video.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, immediately going into Game 1, we see Kemmel's prep be super solid, as right away their items pay dividends. Both Clear Amulet and Safety Goggles allowed Kemmel to just steal a whole turn away from Costa, stopping both a spore, or not a spore, a sleep powder, sorry, from Vivillon, but though it might as well be a spore because of compound eyes. Yeah, it's basically spore. Regardless, the goggles stopped a sleep powder, and the Clear Amulet stopped, I believe it was a parting shot from Morgrim. So Kemmel pretty much just got a free turn there, which always something you love to see. You're never going to complain about that.
Got some information for 0 cost.
Mm-hmm.
And got some free damage, I believe.
Yes. Now, while we're speaking about items, I'm not confident if this ever got revealed in the game. However, this is one thing that we did get to see thanks to Costa having a video as opposed to just simply showdown replays. Annihilate was running Utility Umbrella, an item most people probably don't even know exists, and for the people that do know exist might not even know what it does. Essentially, it makes it so that the user isn't affected by weather at all, and my only guess as to why it would be running this item is so that it doesn't take rain-boosted damage from wave crashes. That's my only guess. Mm-hmm.
That was like my
who knows? Yeah.
prediction.
Maybe that was a great play. Maybe it would have been something else as the best option. But hey, it's definitely something cool to see.
This was a very bulky bulk-up Annihilate, so it could have been spec to take a wave crash. Maybe a
very possible.
A life orb wave crash out of rain. Of course, knowing rain is going to come up. Utility Umbrella might have fixed that calculation.
I mean, regardless of whether or not the rain mattered, something that did matter here was the Salamence. More specifically, its Intimidate, as Costa was able to cycle Intimidate alongside Parting Shot from Morgrim to just completely cripple Kemmel's team. I mean, Landorus, it was -2 attack, and it just kept desperately clicking Rock Slide trying to do something, but this ended up just serving to Kemmel's downfall as it ended up boosting Rage Fist, and Annihilate was just able to completely dominate Game 1 thanks to that. But I'm not going to... Actually, no, I take back that wording. Annihilate didn't dominate it. It was definitely a team effort. The Vivillon, the Morgrim, the Salamence, and the Annihilate proved to be a really strong core in that match, and they all worked really well together.
The Salamence, as well to note, was running Thunderfang, which...
Yes, that was something that I mentioned in a bit more detail in my notes in Game 2. Thunderfang put in so much work.
It really did.
Obviously, it makes sense, right? They have a rain team. That means they have a Pelipper. That means you run an electric move. Thunderfang, right? That's fine. Who cares? That's fine. Game 2, Thunderfang, of all moves, put in tons of work despite no Pelipper being in sight. It was doing decent damage. It was getting paras. It was getting flinches. This thing was just going crazy. This random throwaway move that you have Luxray learn before you replace it with Wild Charge ended up being probably the greatest tool Costa had in Game 2. Yeah. I mean, speaking of just the start of the turn, not even counting, the Thunderfang putting in work, the start of the turn was really in Costa's favor. I mean, Wave Crash, Recoil, plus Foul Play allowed him to decimate the Basque Legion, and with Wordier put to sleep the same turn, that's a really good position.
Unfortunately, the Wordier did get an early wake-up.
Yes, it was a first-turn wake-up, and it did set up Trick Room for Camel, which definitely helped, but as we saw, similar to Game 1, Costa's pivoting and cycling was incredible. Just kept on tagging Mons in and out. But there was one big issue here. In a play that some might consider a bit greedy, Costa ended up losing Annihilate very early on, and that proved to just be way too much, as Kaparaja put in tons of work. It was Terra Fairy, and it was just launching out, a super high damaging play roughs and various other moves. I'm not going to lie, it felt reminiscent of Terra Fairy Heatran, just in the sheer menace that it had. I mean, hey, we saw it in Week 1, Kemmel just folding to a Terra Fairy Heatran. I suppose Week 2, folding to another Terra Fairy Steel type isn't that unreasonable.
Yep, he made the hard read thinking the Annihilate on low HP would survive the turn, maybe predicting a double up into the other slot, I believe it was. Unfortunately, it did not pan out, and losing the Annihilate meant that too much damage just came out from the opposing side, and the play roughs, I think it took out Salamence from at least 90%, if not full.
Oh, it did a ton of damage.
And Salamence bringing the Yachi Berry this week could have been the Fairy Resist.
Yeah, I mean, Yachi versus Roselia is definitely interesting there, right? Salamence obviously does have a 4x weakness, and it's obvious for someone to want to try and exploit that, right? Maybe just running Ice Beam on Pelipper, but as obvious and exploitable of a weakness as that is, it's also something that kind of works in your favor, right? Because it's so exploitable and it's so obvious that you can afford to run items like Yachi Berry to capitalize on your opponent trying to capitalize on you. So maybe reading a bit further into it and going for something like Roselli may have ended up being better.
Yep. Sometimes it's about outplaying or outthinking your opponent, thinking that they're thinking what you're thinking.
Yep, and you just have to question whether or not they know that you know that they know that you're thinking about what they're thinking and that they're thinking about what you're thinking.
Yep.
And of course, in that realm, as we've mentioned, it's very easy to just think yourself into a corner.
Yep.
And we don't want to discredit the Yachi Berry. It was a perfectly fine item, and though it didn't end up working out, it was not a bad inclusion by any means. And trying to get a bit too bold with your predictions can easily be the downfall of a player. So we don't want to encourage that at all.
Of course, there is no direct fairy type on the opposing team, so that could have been in consideration as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, if we want to argue that it's good to predict, well, having no fairy type means that a Terra Fairy can be all the more surprising and catch Costa all the more off guard, which is what happened in Game 2. But going into Game 3, turn 1, we saw a really good play from Kemmel. Smart Terra and a good use of Helping Hand to avoid Fake Out, since Helping Hand has higher priority than Fake Out. It was definitely a solid start, and it was definitely some good play. But Costa was able to retaliate, as once Kaparaja got brought in, it's obviously the number one threat, right? That thing carried Game 2, so most anyone would want to get rid of it immediately. But Costa read into that, and they predicted that the Caparajah was just going to protect, and with that, they were able to just take out the word here and execute their game plan from there.
Of course, if you game 2, the Caparajah hard carried, if you bring it in, you'd expect it to be targeted right away. So if you protect it, you might think you get a free turn.
Yeah, I mean,
Costa read
again,
that.
yeah, it was a perfectly fine play from Kemmel. Like we said, it's a big threat. It's clear that most people would want it gone, but Costa was just able to be that one step ahead in this specific instance. Overall, I don't think there was anything too big to note about Game 3 that we hadn't already said in Games 1 or 2. Costa just did a great job playing to their game plan, not getting shaken up, and they brought all the tools they really needed to overcome Kemmel's roster.
Yep. Of course, watching videos is a lot more fun than watching showdown replays. So this was a entertaining battle visually as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, always fun to see battles on cart, especially when they have live commentary from the players, which is why you should also check out Reckless Trico, not just Costa.
I'll find his video and link it in the description.
Regardless, that leaves us with 2 more people to play their matches, or rather, 2 more sets of people to play their matches. One of which is me.
Frozen Limevolt himself.
Coach of the Santa Maria Samurats.
Versus
and my opponent,
the Colorado Choodle,
who is coached by Fred. Now, my roster that I brought was Annihilate, Klefki, Armor Rouge, Fungus, Rotom Wash, and the Dawn Fan.
Versus Chien-Pao, Hisuian Arcanine, Scyther, Articuno, Gallade, and Abomasnow.
Mm-hmm.
You want to see some snow?
Well, you're not gonna. So.
Yep, snow went up. Aurora Veil went up. So did Trick Room.
Yes, that was my plan going into this. So I saw Fred's roster, and I figured there are 2 routes that it can go. It can go offense, and it can go snow. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to try and craft something that can play into both fairly well. So what I ended up with was Armor Rouge plus Fungus. The Fungus being Terra Fire, allowing it to be able to resist all the ice moves it would normally be weak to, while not running something like Terra Steel so that it wouldn't be weak to the Gallade or the Arcanine. Terra Fire ended up just being good. Of course, it's still weak to one of the Arcanine stabs, but ignore that part. It's not relevant.
I don't think it clicked that at all.
We'll get into it. Regardless, yes. Game 1, the plan was just to set up Trick Room with Armor Rouge and just spam Heat Wave against, admittedly, Fred's very fire-weak roster, right? Like, of the Pokemon that we saw him bring, 4 of them are weak to fire. One of them is Abomasnow, who's 4 times weak. I let it next to Fungus to, be able to click Rage Powder, but with his lead being Articuno plus Abomasnow, I figured the only play he could possibly make was Blizzard plus Aurora Veil. So I got a little bit greedy, and I went for Spore plus Trick Room, which ended up working in my favor, as alongside a Terrafire from the Fungus to make it so it didn't take much damage from Blizzard, I was able to just get into a really good position. From there, I just played Defend the Castle. The castle, in this case, being Armor Rouge, as opposed to the Palace hand we saw previous.
The castle also getting a nice little chill himself.
Yep, he is a fire type. His head is flaming, but he was frozen for 3 whole turns. I mean, I'm just glad that's all it lasted for, right?
Yeah,
like the Fungus was a trooper here. And the fact that he was able to keep Armor Rouge that whole time safe, like he was doing nothing for 3 turns. He was basically asleep for 3 turns. And the whole time, Fungus was able to keep him safe with a combination of Spore, Rage Powder, and Pollen Puff to heal it back up. Once Armor Rouge was able to unthaw and I was able to reestablish Trick Room, the game was basically over. Armor Rouge and Rotom just completely cleaned up. But I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit with one play that I think was pretty funny. That being, I forget the turn number that it was specifically, but the scenario here is that I have Armor Rouge against their Chien-Pao, and my Armor Rouge has -1 defense and special defense because it clicked Armor Cannon. you just click Sucker Punch into that thing, right? Like, it's just going to click Heat Wave or Armor Cannon, whatever. You just click Sucker Punch into it. Nope. I chose to reverse my own Trick Room in order to dodge a Sucker Punch from the Chen Pao, which ended up winning me the game. Like, I'm pretty confident I would have been able to win even if I got that turn wrong, but the fact that I got it right felt so good.
Your Annihilate was Choice Scarf, right?
That is true. That's something we saw in Game 2, so fairly good segue. Now, Game 2. Since Fungus stole all the spotlight with Terra Fairy in the previous game,
Terrifire.
I was actually able to... Sorry, Terra Fire, not Terra Fairy. We've seen so many Terra Fairies this week that I've just kind of gotten used to saying it. It's my own team. I shouldn't have made that mistake.
I think yours was the only Terrifier we've seen all week.
It's possible. Regardless, I can do more than just Terrifier, as I was able to really catch Fred off guard with an immediate Terra Water Terra Blast into the Hisuian Arcanine to just immediately Oko it. Like, I led the Armor Rouge plus a Klefki, and you see that, you're just thinking, oh, okay, he's going to like Thunder Wave and Trick Room, or he's going to like set up screens and Trick Room. Nope. I went against my game plan. I decided not to set up Trick Room. I figured it would be better to just set up a Reflect to make sure I don't take too much damage, and I was able to just KO the Arcanine and prevent it from clicking a single move. That thing did nothing.
Did it lay out? Was it Intimidate?
I'm unsure. I don't actually recall, but I think it might have actually been Flash Fire, or potentially even Rockhead. Flash Fire honestly makes sense, given, how fire weak his roster is. I feel like if you had brought it Game 1, it probably could have done good things.
Unfortunately, we don't get to figure it out.
Yeah, and besides, Game 1, I did have the Rotom Wash in the back with Hydro Pump, so who knows? It may have not have mattered. Regardless of that, though, it was very nice to get that thing out of the way. We saw just how much of a monster it was able to be in Week 1, so not having to deal with it that much, I was very happy for. Now, another thing that happened in Game 2 was Klefki. He's just a little set of keys. He's harmless. He couldn't hurt a fly. And then he comes in with a steel chair. More specifically, a steel beam. Which, this didn't end up coming up because the Chen Pao was Sash, which, to be fair, I went with the steel beam straight into a Gallade, predicting a switch into Chen Pao. I got that right, and I got the Chen Pao down to its Sash. A little behind-the-scenes thing, I gave this Klefki special attack. Enough special attack so that it was able to Oko max HP for special defense Chen Pao. I wanted that thing dead. I wanted to make sure that thing would not live. So while it didn't end up mattering because it was just, fast and offensive with Sash, I dream of the world where that actually managed to happen. Yeah. Regardless of that, though.
Once again, very few notes. All I have for Game 2 is just Steel Beam.
I don't blame you. I mean, that Steel Beam put in a lot of work, and one of the most underrated benefits of Steel Beam is its cost, right? Like, this was something we saw in Week 1 with the Forsaken City Frogadiers, where their Klefki just sat on the field and wasn't able to do anything. It got amfatted, as the term is called. All my friends are dead, where you have the support Pokemon on the field, but then you just pick off all its teammates while the support Pokemon isn't able to do anything. Steel Beam not only allows Klefki to be a real threat, thanks to doing huge damage. I mean, even if it has a low special attack, this is still a 140 base power stab move. But it also cuts its own HP in half, guaranteeing that the Klefki is able to do what it needs to do, and then it can just die. It can just leave the field, and it doesn't take up that slot. It's the same reason people love using moves like Memento.
We actually saw that in Gen 8 singles with Excadrill. It was huge for spin blocking.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely a very underrated attribute of the move. The fact that the cost can be used to your advantage with a bit of clever play and planning.
But it was also used to avoid or not let the opponent attack, because it would take an attack and then just Steel Beam to kill itself.
Yeah, that way the opponent wouldn't be able to rapid spin against anything, and that way hazards would stay up.
Yep.
Hazards, what are those? Those don't exist in doubles.
Unless you're playing against me.
You do not count. We all know this. Regardless, continuing on with Game 2, my Annihilate was able to outspeed the Chen Pao, which did confirm Choice Scarf to the opponent, And with that, they were able to very smartly Terra Ghost their Gallade in order to make itself immune to my Annihilape's close combat. And since I was down to my last 2 Mons, this meant that my Annihilape was basically dead. So that was a great play from them. However, Gallade, even though it's been very heavily buffed this generation, it still wasn't quite enough to deal with the Rotom Wash, as I was able to land a Will-O-Wisp into a Protect for a little bit of leftovers recovery, into a Hydro Pump to secure the game as 2-0, putting me as the 5th person who is currently undefeated. I am also one of the people who, more than just not dropping a set, actually hasn't dropped a game, which, again, I feel like I'm painting a target on my back, and I cannot wait to see what someone does to take the shot.
Yep. We don't usually see the Will-O-Wisp hitting.
Especially from Rotom Wash. But 07's Aaron Zhang, we thank you for your sacrifice.
It did buff the move.
They did buff the move because of that man's poor, poor soul. And he still misses it to this day.
Running 3 Will-O-Wisp on the same team. I would love that game.
Yeah.
Moving
Regardless.
on.
Yes, that does bring us to our very last match of the night. Yes.
The Saucy Spidops versus the New Zealand Zekrons.
Coached by Jay and Jaggy, respectively. I would not blame you for getting their names a little bit mixed up. You know, they're both J.A., and both of them actually, I'm not going to lie, I got confused when looking in the Discord server because they have really similar looking profile pictures. They're both just like pink blobs that are vaguely the same size and shape.
Oh, that's great.
So not only are their names not that far off, but their profile pictures actually confused me a bit. Regardless.
Jay bringing the Baxcalibur, King Gambit, Fletchling, Tauros, Sylveon, and Salazzle.
On the other side, we have Jaggy with Magneton alongside Pawmot, Grafify, Gothitelle, Fluttermane, and Dunsparce.
Unfortunately, some spoilers. We did not see the Fletchling do 73%, was it?
There's no Hariyama. It wasn't meant to happen.
Yep.
We found we learned a little bit about Food Chain last week, for those who haven't seen it. Fletchling did over 70% to Hariyama. Moving on.
We did confirm that it was no item, at least.
Yes. Game 1, we saw some immediate Terras. The Pawmot shed its fighting type, but the power boost it got for going for, Terra Electric to get more damage on the double shock didn't matter, as because it lost its fighting type, it lost its Dark Resist. And there's a King Gambit on the other side of the field.
Terra Poison King Gambit. That, upon tearing, lost its fighting weakness.
Not only losing its fighting weakness, gaining a fighting resistance, and clicking Swords Dance. This thing was terrifying. We saw some really cool techs on Jay's team, most notably the Salazzle. We saw it try and, play a more supportive role last week. This week, it really was able to do that well, basically really copying Screamtail. I mean, it was running both Encore and Disable, which allowed him to basically play a 2v1 game, having the Magneton sit on the field being completely useless. Jay made this battle look super one-sided. It was just a complete eclipse. The Magneton was able to try and have a last stand, but it was just too much.
The Magneton did get a double knockout with Discharge.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't like a 4-0 complete clean sweep. The Magneton was able to try and do something.
And of course, it could have gone in his favor. Discharge getting a paralysis maybe on the Baxcalibur. And of course, Fletchling not doing 70% to it.
I mean, if I recall correctly, the Baxcalibur was faster than the Magneton, so that couldn't have even happened. Am I misremembering that?
I believe you're correct, but the Baxcalibur also did not one-shot the Magneton.
I see. So sure, maybe it's possible through some divine blessing for Jaggy to have won this game, but Jay definitely had a dominant performance in Game 1.
Absolutely dominant.
And Game 2...
Game 2.
Yeah. And Game 2. Not end Game 2 as in, and then there's Game 2. End Game 2 as in another super dominant performance. Salazzle's super fast fake out was really scary this game.
The Dunsparce did set up a Tailwind, and Jackie did not fall into the Encore Disable trap.
Mm-hmm.
But we did see later on the Palmot, actually. It
Mm-hmm.
used Revival Blessing, and it must have been choice locked because it Revival Blessing back in, I believe it was the Gothitelle, and then kept struggling.
Yeah, definitely something that didn't end up working out for Jackie. Like, to be entirely honest, I don't even think it's wholly their fault. Jay's performance here was just dominant beyond belief. Like, as was mentioned, Salazzle adding super fast fake out onto its other disruptive supporting tools just showed how much it was able to enable King Gambit, which just kept clicking Swords Dance and kept sucker punching and just kept kowtow cleaving and just kept pretty much blowing a hole through Jaggy's whole team. Like, this thing isn't
Those
fast, sure, but it's a goddamn powerhouse when it does hit.
those two, I think, were on the field for most of both games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Salazzle King Gambit, not a duo or pairing that you normally think about, but in this context, they've shown themselves to be pretty effective. And yeah, as you mentioned, Jaggy tried to cling on to hope with that revival blessing, but it was clear that the hole Jay punched into their team was just too much to handle, and King Gambit really showed how it earned its name in this battle.
We
Like
actually,
seriously, you've seen that thing's evolution method. It pretty much replicated it here. We're gonna see the fourth tier evolution after this battle.
the Gothitelle, it got one shot by the King Gambit and Revival
Mm-hmm.
Blessing backed in. That was how we figured out the item was the Citrus Berry.
Yep.
Of course, Revival Blessing puts you back at 50%, came back
Mm-hmm.
in, ate its berry, proceeded to get one shot again by the King Gambit.
Now, what do you think is a funnier way to reveal an item? Finding out about Citrus Berry because of Revival Blessing, or finding out about Mirror Herb because of Moody? Which one of those do you think is the sillier way to reveal an item?
Moody.
You think it's the Moody?
I think it's the Moody.
All right, fair enough. Well, hey, speaking of silly items, you want a little behind the scenes about Jay's team?
Go for it.
They weren't even at their final form. The Baxcalibur, it was running loaded dice.
Oh.
And because Jay messed up, they accidentally did not have any multi-hit moves.
They ran Glaive Rush. They ran Ice Shard, I believe.
Yeah, and then I believe it was Icicle Crash Protect.
Oh.
When I was verifying the team, I saw the loaded dice, and I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was a little weird, but I was like, hey, maybe he's trying to throw off their opponent. Maybe they have, like, Frisk, and he's trying to, like, mess with them. Nope. He just fucked up. He just forgot. Which shows just how scary this team is, and how scary Jay is as a player. They're very good, and as you probably noticed, if you can count past 5, Jay is, of course, our 6th and final member who, after week 2, is undefeated.
Yep. And we did not at all see the Grafii or the Fluttermane. I think the Fluttermane showed up and got sucker punched.
Yeah, I mean, Fluttermane it wasn't able to really do anything into this King Gambit, right? Like, the Terra Poison was just so perfect for stopping it. I guess you could try and Shadow Ball into it, but at that point, it's a very risky play. You know, it's not dissimilar to what Robbie did to the Heatran, right? Like, going for a move that would otherwise be resisted into a move that would just be neutral. Like, it's not even that high of a reward, all things considered.
I think that is what happened in game 2. It hit with a Shadow Ball, but it only did 30 to 40%, I think.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's not bad damage, but against something like King Gambit, you're really hoping to two-shot it so that it can't get going.
Off of a Fluttermane, not taking not doing more than 70 with a neutral hit from Fluttermane, that's just not something you see.
It definitely isn't. But it's also something that Jay was able to prep for since he knew he was facing that Fluttermane no matter what. Because, I mean, we saw a couple instances where an S tier didn't get brought previously, but when you have a Fluttermane, you're bringing Fluttermane. There's no discussion to be had.
We did see instances of the S tier not being played, but it was on the team except for, I believe it was Trico. So, of course, you could see it in preview and be like, okay, they have their S tier. In this case, of course, both teams had their S tiers. King Gambit's in S, right?
Yes, King Gambit is the S tier. God, if that thing wasn't. I feel like there's an argument to put that thing in S+, but, I mean, Ruins are up there, so probably not.
Full Dark type S+, let's go.
I wouldn't be surprised at this point, man. That thing is stupid.
Dark types actually did get a pretty good buff this generation.
When did Dark types not get buffed? Let's be honest here. Ever since Gen 5, ever since Gen 6, they've just done nothing but eat.
They didn't get anything Gen 7 or 8, I believe.
That was the prankster immunity.
Right.
Regardless.
For some reason, I think that's Gen 6, and then I remember taunting in a Veltal, and I'm like,
Yep.
Yeah.
Regardless,
anyway.
Those were all the matches. Yes, as we mentioned, there are currently 6 players who are undefeated. If I recall correctly, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 14, 15 players who are 1-1, and I believe that would leave us with 5 players who are currently 0-2. It's still a very close race. Nobody is out of it yet. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we got in store for us going forward. Smeargle, anything else you wanted to say before we end it off?
Good luck, Link. Do me proud with double Reggies.
Your Regidrago sucks. It accomplished nothing. L plus ratio.
Nah, good luck to everyone.
Yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone does. I apologize to anyone that I may do bad things to going forward. I mean that in terms of Pokemon. Don't you dare take that out of context.
And apologizing to Fro and Ian.
Why'd you have to say it again?
Not Fro. Yeah, Fro.
Well, at least I'm not alone in getting names wrong. All right, I think that's going to be us. This has been the Unown Draft League Podcast, bringing you Season 2's recap. Take care, everyone. We're looking forward to being back next week.
Yep. Have a good week, everyone. Good luck. Have some fun battles. See you next week.